Around the halfway point of the 2024 NFL season, it appears as if the MVP has already slimmed down to a two-man race. Welcome to American Baller, where we focus on all things NFL. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell for future videos. There's still a lot of football left to be played and a handful of other players who could turn up the heat in the second half of the season and make the MVP race very interesting. Today, we'll break down the NFL's top performers so far this season and make our prediction of who will go on to win the most coveted individual award in the league. 1. Lamar Jackson. So far, it appears as if Lamar Jackson could be well on his way to his second straight MVP. He's been one of, if not the best player in the entire league so far this season. While during the early parts of his career, many looked at him as a player who could only get things done with his legs, Jackson has quickly flipped the narrative over the past couple of seasons and has been one of the best passers in the NFL. Through the first 9 games of the season, Jackson has thrown for 2,379 yards and 20 touchdowns while only throwing 2 interceptions. Currently, he ranks 3rd in passing yards and tied for 2nd in passing touchdowns. While he's been performing very well through the air, don't get it twisted. Jackson is still arguably the best dual-threat quarterback of all time. On the ground, he's already picked up 505 yards and a pair of touchdowns. There's a chance he could finish the year with 4,000 yards through the air and 1,000 on the ground. Along with this, he currently leads the league in a plethora of statistical categories, including a 7.8% touchdown percentage, averaging 9.3 yards per throw, a 120.7 passer rating, and a 77 QBR. Achieving all of this by itself is impressive, but doing so while sharing an offense with Derrick Henry makes these numbers absolutely mind-blowing. But as we know, numbers alone are not enough to win the MVP in the NFL. Along with having league-leading numbers, you also have to lead your team to wins, and Jackson checks this box as well. Heading into Week 10, he's led the Baltimore Ravens to a 6-3 record, and they appear to be a true championship threat in the AFC. His best game so far this season came in Week 5 when the Ravens took on Cincinnati Bengals. This was an absolute shootout, but there was no stopping Jackson. He finished the contest with an insane 348 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 0 picks through the air, while picking up an additional 55 yards on the ground. The Ravens needed everything they got out of the reigning MVP, narrowly coming out on top by a final score of 41-38. As long as Jackson can outlast one other player on this list while continuing to play at this level, there is no doubt that he will go on to win his second straight MVP award. 2. Josh Allen. Hot on Jackson's tail in the MVP race is Josh Allen. This has been one of, if not the best, season of Allen's career so far. Throughout his time in the league up to this point, one of the biggest flaws in his game was his constant turnovers. He's well on pace to set a career low in interceptions, throwing only 2 so far this season, and making it through the first quarter of the year without a single pick. Through 9 games, Allen has thrown for 2,001 yards, 17 touchdowns, and 2 picks. He ranks 10th in passing yards and 4th in passing touchdowns. Similar to Jackson, Allen is also very dangerous on the ground, rushing for 211 yards and 3 touchdowns so far this season. So far, the Bills sit in 2nd place in the AFC with a record of 7-2, also being a true threat to represent the AFC in the Super Bowl this season. His best game of the year so far came in Week 3 when the Bills took on the Jacksonville Jaguars. Allen had a nearly flawless game, throwing for 263 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 0 picks, while picking up an additional 44 yards on the ground. Along with this, he had a crazy completion percentage of 76.67%. To put the cherry on top, the Bills came out on top in dominant fashion by a final score of 47-10. Voter fatigue is a real thing when it comes to MVP voting, and there are going to be quite a few people out there who don't want to vote for the same player 2 years in a row. If this ends up being the case, there's a strong chance that Allen finally brings home his first MVP. He's still in a great position to surpass Jackson if he's able to keep his foot on the gas through the second half of the season. Achieving all of this and leading his team to an amazing record while losing his star receiver Stephon Diggs in the offseason speaks volumes to just how talented Allen is. It could easily be argued that no other player we will cover today has a weaker array of weapons around him than him. 3. Patrick Mahomes. While Jackson and Allen have become the early frontrunners for MVP, the best quarterback of the post-Tom Brady generation has quickly become a slept-on candidate to win the award. That player, of course, being Patrick Mahomes. Despite this being Mahomes' worst season of his career so far since taking over as the starter in Kansas City in 2018, there is one factor that's keeping him in this race. Thus far, his numbers have been extremely lackluster, throwing for only 1,942 yards, 11 touchdowns, and 9 interceptions. If he keeps up this pace, he'll set a career high in interceptions and low in passing touchdowns. He currently ranks 14th in passing yards and 11th in passing touchdowns. It appears that he's finally beginning to wake up from the Super Bowl hangover, with his best performance of the season coming in the Chiefs' most recent game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. In this matchup, Mahomes was finally beginning to look like his old self, throwing for 291 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions, while completing 77.27% of his passes. Going on to set or tie season highs in completion percentage, passing yards, and passing touchdowns, while also being his first game of the year without a pick. This was a hard-fought game for him and Kansas City, narrowly coming out on top in overtime by a score of 30-24. Even with this being an out-of-character season so far from Mahomes, there is one key factor keeping him in the MVP race: the fact that the Chiefs are still holding on to a perfect 9-0 record. They've outlasted the rest of the league and stand as the only undefeated team left. If they're able to pull off this perfect regular season run, and Mahomes has even average numbers, it may be enough for him to add a third MVP to his resume. 4. Jared Goff. Now moving out of the top 3, we're looking at true dark horse candidates. First up, we've got Jared Goff. So far, Goff has quietly been one of the top performing quarterbacks in the entire league. He's thrown for 1,840 yards, 14 touchdowns, and 4 picks, while leading the team with an elite completion percentage of 74.9%. He ranks 17th in passing yards and 9th in passing touchdowns. With Goff at the helm, the Detroit Lions have not only been one of the top offenses in the league, but also one of the best teams in the entire NFL. Thus far, the Lions have been the team to beat in the NFC, currently posting a record of 7-1. His best game of the year up to this point took place in Week 6 when the Lions took on the Dallas Cowboys. Despite only throwing the ball 25 times, Goff completely lit up Dallas, throwing for 315 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 0 picks. This was a dominant win for the Lions, taking the game by a final score of 47-9. With the Lions having the best running back duo in the league in Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery, it has greatly limited what Goff has been able to accomplish through the air. If Detroit didn't have such a balanced offensive attack, there's a strong chance that he would be much more talked about in the MVP race. Similar to Mahomes, if he keeps playing the way he is and his team keeps winning, there's a chance he could end up coming out of nowhere to steal the MVP award. For this to happen, the Lions would likely have to go undefeated or at most lose one more game by year's end. 5. Matthew Stafford. Rounding out the list, we have the man who was replaced by Goff in Detroit and a huge dark horse candidate to win the MVP award this year, Matthew Stafford. Things have not played out in Stafford or the Los Angeles Rams' way at all this season, with both star wide receivers Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua missing a majority of the first half of the year. With them both back in some capacity for the second half of the year, there is a chance that Stafford goes on to shock the world. Without them in the lineup, he was still playing at a high level, but nowhere near good enough to even have his name brought up in the MVP conversation. Despite this, if he and the Rams play things perfectly in the second half of the season, there is a chance that not only do they make the playoffs, but their quarterback brings home the MVP award. Thus far, Stafford has thrown for 1,969 yards, 9 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions, ranking 12th in passing yards and 21st in passing touchdowns. These are nowhere near MVP numbers, but there's still a lot of football left to be played. We've seen the kind of player that Stafford turns into when Kupp is on the field, let alone with Nacua in the mix as well. With the emergence of Kyren Williams as an explosive pass catcher out of the backfield, there is a chance that everything comes together perfectly and Stafford leads the Rams on a revenge tour through the back end of the season, winning MVP in the process. His best game of the season came in Week 8 against the Minnesota Vikings and one of the only games this year in which LA's wide receiver core was at full strength. Stafford showed out in this matchup, throwing for 279 yards, 4 touchdowns and a pick. Due to his incredible performance through the air, the Rams came out on top 30-20. If he's able to put together a string of games like this, he'll quickly shoot up the MVP power rankings. Currently, they sit at 4-4 and have a long way to go, but they have the weapons and talent to do the impossible. Who will go on to win the MVP? If these 5 MVP candidates continue to keep playing at the same level they have through the first half of the season, it'll be very difficult for voters not to award Lamar Jackson with the award for the second straight season. For years, this has been a quarterback's award, and he's been the top performing quarterback, putting up insane numbers both through the air and on the ground while leading his team to being true contenders. Barring any major drop-offs from Jackson, the only true competition he has is Mahomes, who likely will win the award if the Chiefs finish the regular season undefeated. Who do you think will be this year's MVP? Let us know if you agree with our prediction of Jackson or if you think someone else will take the award. Thank you for tuning in to American Baller. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell for future videos.